Welcome to Coffee Commerce. My name is Sean Ramit, and I'm the grandson of a coffee farmer from Guyana, South America. On Coffee Commerce, we talk about the stories behind coffee as they relate to ideas, culture, and business. And we've been talking about Coffeehouse spies. Last, we spoke about the Ottoman Empire employing spies to get a gauge on the public's perception and the commoner's view of the empire. This form of spying was not about gathering intelligence about individuals with a plan to expose criminal activity. The purpose of this form of undercover work was to understand the mood of the empire. In Western Europe, however, things would be different. Spies were more calculating about understanding who said what. This was a strategy used in France, and in particular, since the days of Louis XV. A main artery for such intelligence gathering were coffee houses, or as they would say, the French cafes. These French cafes were seen by Louis XV to be problematic, mostly because they were often a treasure trove of what one might call radical thought. It was definitely a place of new thoughts and even contrary thoughts to the current establishment. As mentioned before, most of Europe had been in a constant state of numbness with the continual drinking of wines and ales, since this was safer to drink than drinking the water. With the advent of coffee and coffee houses, Europeans were being awakened to new things, and coffee houses became a breeding ground for engaging conversation and new ideas, often argumentative and ripe for debate. Louis XV was particularly keen to have a network of spies whose mission ranged from undercover work in foreign capitals to simply eavesdropping on people's conversations who King Louis saw as potential threats or agitators of discontent for his monarchy. The king and the spies found coffee houses an ideal venue for intelligence that may have national security elements, or at least gossip that the king would find interesting. One historian, Mark Pendergrass, was quoted as saying, "One of the ironies about coffee is it makes people think. It sort of creates egalitarian places, coffee houses where people can come together." So the French Revolution and the American Revolution were planned in coffee houses. End of quote. And it was this type of mechanism that made coffee houses a threat to the French regime. One of these coffee houses that became a target for the spies of Louis XV was Café de Proquet, which opened in 1689. Café de Proquet was a gathering place for many noted French actors, authors, dramatists, musicians, and other intellectuals of the 18th century. In 1774, Louis XV would die of the smallpox, and the throne would be passed on to his grandson, Louis XVI, in that same year. Most certainly, coffee houses were places that were very anti-establishment, and the monarchy and the ruling class had reason to be concerned about what was being said at these coffee establishments. Spying on these establishments were most certainly profitable. Perhaps the French had taken note from the Ottomans' multiple failed attempts to shut down coffee houses, so they may have chosen to keep them open in an effort to keep the communication alive. As good as the intelligence may have been from the coffee houses in Paris, it did not seem to lead the government or the monarchy to change their ways. In fact, the times became more turbulent as the ruling elite were seen to have to make decisions that would make it seem that they were more out of touch than anything. During the turbulent days in 1789, one could find at the tables drinking and coffee, debating the burning questions of the hour, such characters as Marat, Robespierre, Danton, and Hébert. Earlier in that year, King Louis XVI had brought together government and leaders at Versailles to discuss the financial crisis. Nothing was resolved, and many would say it ended in confusion. As a result of the Versailles meeting, Louis XVI dismissed Jacques Necker. The issue was that Jacques Necker was the only government member the people trusted. This did nothing more than to further anger the French people against the king. And it would be at Café de Foix that the French Revolution was sparked. But it had been fueled by other coffee houses in the area around Palais Royal. The monarchy had good reason to be concerned about coffee houses. It was at these coffee houses that not only did the French Revolution get sparked in 1789, starting with the fall of Bastille, it led to the fall of the monarchy and the rise of Napoleon, who was himself a frequent coffee drinker and frequented the coffee houses in Paris. Arthur Young, who was visiting Paris at the time of the French Revolution being sparked, wrote an account of the scene at Palais Royal. He said, "The coffee houses presented yet more singular and astounding spectacles. They are not only crowded within, but other expectant crowds are at the doors and windows listening to certain orators who were from tables or chairs captivating their audience. The eagerness with which they are heard and the thunder of applause that they receive for every sentiment of more than common hardiness or violence against the government cannot easily be imagined." End of quote. Despite all this radical activity around coffee houses, they would continue to thrive in France. In the reign of Louis XV, Paris hosted 600 cafes. By the turn of the 18th century, there were more than 800. By 1843, the number had grown to more than 3,000. Is it despite the radical ideas of the time that coffee houses began to grow? Were people turning a blind eye to the things going on in coffee houses because of their love of the beverage? It would certainly seem that the ruling class had reason to plant spies nonetheless. Or perhaps it was because of all this hive of new thought and ideas that we see coffee houses blossom. And this source of information and cultural shift will continue. But that's another story for another cup of coffee. Thank you.